I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Cynthia, President Cynthia Teniente-Matson to the IngenioUs community today. Welcome, President Matson.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you.
So, our listeners are always very interested in the leadership journeys of our guests. In your case, your career spans over 30 years in higher education leadership, from roles in Alaska to Texas, back to leading San Jose State University. Can you tell us something about your journey, your leadership journey, and the pivotal moments and or forces that have shaped the leader that you are today?
So I am a first generation college graduate, and neither of my parents had an opportunity to go to college. And as I think choices that they made and faced in their life caused them to leave their area. I'm a native Texan. I'm from San Antonio, and that community in which I lived had been previously redlined. Of course, I had no idea what that meant. And nor did it really come to me until later in life what all of that meant when you come sort of full circle. So my parents sought better opportunities, and they did what many Latinos of that era and generation did. And they left their hometown, their home community of San Antonio, and followed a sibling to California. I was 8 years old at the time, and that's actually what brought me to California the first time. My dad was a tradesman, and he was able to secure a job in Alaska, and that was a very life-changing for them, for he and my mom, who both worked. And because of that opportunity, moving to Alaska, they were able to break into the middle class. And because of that, I was able to go to college and understand the importance and significance of that. So that's what took me to Alaska. My family moved to Naval Air Station, Adak, Alaska. And that's where I was for middle school and high school. So the idea of going to college as a first generation student and as a Latina also meant, to the extent possible, staying close to home. So that's how I ended up at the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, because I needed a place to live, a residential community, and what took me and kept me there. So that's where I graduated from college and went on to earn my MBA at the University of Alaska at Anchorage. And when I started working after graduation, I started amongst the administrative ranks in the University of Alaska with my undergraduate degree and worked through various administrative roles. And that's what led me to my first real leadership role as vice chancellor at the University of Alaska at Anchorage at the time, after earning my MBA. So I've always appreciated the opportunities that public education provides for continued career development and career advancement. But I worked my way up through various administrative roles into the vice chancellor role at the University of Alaska Anchorage. I was very inspired and committed to, my boss, who was somewhat of a mentor, but also an executive sponsor. At the time, I didn't really understand what those words meant as much as I do now, looking back. And so as an executive sponsor, when he decided to retire, was a pivotal moment about, do I want to spend my entire career in Alaska? I've been here since a child, a teenager, or do I want to come back to something else, something different? So at that pivotal moment, I talked with others who I trust and respect and sought advice. And my husband and I thought about what we wanted to do. And I was recruited to California State University at Fresno. And that's what brought me back to California as a young adult. And it was my second vice presidency. So I'd become the youngest vice chancellor at the University of Alaska in Anchorage, and also having been an alumnus there and gone to public schools in Alaska. It was just kind of a unique thing in that era. And coming back to California and coming to California State University at Fresno was an exciting opportunity for me, because it gave me a real opportunity to think about what were my career goals, what were my career aspirations, and to really thoughtfully think about what would be the right fit for me, moving my whole family. So by then, like I said, my husband and I had two children, And we really had to think about what does that next step look like. And as part of that, I had this sort of value-based agenda of what I was looking for. And it really tied very closely to what I wanted personally and then what I also wanted professionally. And personally was what I was looking for my two sons. And my husband worked remotely at that time, so we could move. It wasn't going to impact his work. So that helped us to determine when I was interviewing for roles and to look more intently not only at the responsibilities that I was going to be looking for and taking on in my new job, what I was looking for, but also what was most significant for my kids. So those were really pivotal moments that took me and prompted me to move from what I had known and grown up in at the University of Alaska to California State University, Fresno. I was there for just a couple months shy of 11 years. I
Mm.
had wonderful mentorship and sponsorship there, which we can talk more about in the conversation. I earned my doctorate there. I was very encouraged by my boss, who was also a sponsor and the likes of the significance of earning my doctorate degree. As a CFO, the MBA is a terminal degree. I was deliriously happy in that role and the responsibilities that I had in that role. But to continue to progress did require, as it does in higher ed, continuous learning. And I was very supported, encouraged, nurtured to earn a doctorate. And with that same sponsorship, what it the idea was planted to me, you should think about becoming a university president. And that's sort of what opened those doors for consideration of those opportunities.
Yeah.
So I could talk more about the presidency as we move through the conversation and certainly respond to anything you might have to share.
Sure. Well, thank you for setting the stage so nicely. And I think it's helpful, one, to hear you talk about the importance of mentors and executive sponsors. So I'm glad to hear you had that opportunity. Now, you became, I believe, the second president of Texas A&M. So when you went, you were the second president, and you led the institution in San Antonio from 2015 to 2023, during which you spearheaded the growth, significant growth of the campus into a comprehensive master's university, while also earning the U.S. Department of Education Hispanic Serving Institution designation, the HSI designation, as well as the Seal of Excellencia, which is awarded to only 24 institutions nationwide. I know a little bit about the seal. I interviewed the two founders for the
Yeah,
podcast
Deborah
last
and
year. Yeah,
yeah,
they're
Deborah and
wonderful. But I
they
had
are.
I had no idea it was such a rigorous process and is really a very prestigious thing to have earned. So congratulations to you and the university for that. I'm just curious, of all of the achievements, and there are many during your tenure there, is there one in particular you're most proud of?
So, a couple things I want to say about returning to San Antonio. I shared with you that I'm a native Texan and I was born in San Antonio.
Yeah.
So, coming back to San Antonio to the exact same zip code that my parents worked so hard to leave, to come back as president of a university that was being built in this community that had previously been redlined was deeply personal, rewarding, and it's about fit. When you think about the idea of becoming a university president anywhere, especially as a woman and a woman of color, you have to have real clarity of purpose around fit and how you're going to accomplish leading and guiding at the broadest degree possible for the entirety of the university. So you have to be somewhere where you're absolutely going to love the university. So for me, when I was nominated for the position and talked to the recruiter for the first time about it, I went over to my dad. I looked at the Google map and went over to my dad's and my mom and dad's and pulled up. I said, I'm thinking about applying for this role. Fred, can you tell me about the neighborhood? And so I pulled up the map and my dad looked at it with me and my mom and said, oh yeah, you were. So that used to be what it was, right adjacent to Toyota, an empty field. This is where you went to elementary school. This is where you were baptized. This is where your mom and I went to high school. This is where your grandma lives or lived. So it was in this neighborhood, this quadrant that is the zip code 78224,
Mm,
which was in my DNA. So when I started that job, a good friend and colleague said to me, before you go to campus on your first day, drive by your childhood home, park in front, and write down everything you can remember. Just write down everything you can remember as you build your leadership narrative, your leadership journey around this. So those were really an impactful and influential means of discovery leading that university to better understand the opportunities that Texas A&M University San Antonio was creating for generations of people that never had access to a four-year public university,
mm,
with the significant quality of the Texas A&M brand and reputation in San Antonio. And for the Texas A&M University system, it was a critical investment in the metropolitan urban region. San Antonio is the seventh largest city in the United States, and it was a significant lift to build a campus anywhere in the thousands. So there were a number of significant accomplishments. Going there, um, having a deeper understanding of my own self-discovery, my leadership journey, the leadership journey of the institution, what it meant to the community, what it meant to the school districts, what it meant to the generations of families that were impacted there. So there were a couple things that I am most proud of. When I arrived, as you mentioned, it was an upper division only institution. I'd never heard the word downward expansion. So it was a junior seniors community college transfer place. The charge when I was hired was to become a comprehensive four-year university. We already had some master's degrees, so it was about adding the freshman and sophomore experience. And that we secured the funding. I started in January of 2015. I was parachuted into the legislative biennial session, and we secured the funding to build out and welcome our first freshman class in the next year. So by end of session in June of 15, so 6 months after my arrival, we had secured the money, but we had to be prepared to launch the first freshman class the next year. So it's June, it's July when you learn you're going to really get the money, and you're off to the races with a campus community that was built for an upper division only institution. So it was critical that, one of the things that I'm very proud of is we hired outstanding faculty, we built an outstanding curriculum, and we knew what the student body was going to look like. It was largely going to be Latino or Latina. So I often leaned on what did it mean when HBCUs were being developed, and how might we think about some of those leadership practices in what it means to be founded in what would become an HSI institution. So that guided a lot of my own thinking and how we led, a lot of the traditions that we built in, the wraparound support, the care, the work that is enormous, and it's still an enormous amount of work. But we were in a position of knowing what the literature says helps create success and high impact practices in life. So over my journey there, I was really focused on experiential learning. And really, I came to understand, like my own journey, what agency and cultural values that first generation students, which were primarily what we were serving at the time, bring to a university like Texas A&M San Antonio, which is coming up out of the ground with its first freshman class. What's missing? So part of what is missing in the first generation experience is network affluence, access to what does it mean to be an accountant if you're a first generation student and you come from a home filled with love, but in paraprofessional trades or trades and crafts like my parents. So Mr. Mays helped me with funding to create the Mays Center for Experiential Learning and Community Engagement. So those were some fundamentals in how we were thinking about building out the university. Mr. Henry Cisneros, Dr. Cisneros also invested, and we created the Cisneros Institute for Emerging Leaders. And that was, how do we think about leadership? So you have experiential learning. Now we're tackling civic engagement, and how do we tackle leadership for anybody, but and we served lots of students, but it was primarily a Latino community. As the university continued to grow, we were students were coming from other parts of Texas. They were coming from other parts of the United States. We built our first residence hall while I was there. And one of the things that was the most impactful throughout the pandemic was our opportunity to build and really cement a partnership with the public university health system there, which is what the county funded hospital system was called University Health in partnership, and bringing that to the south side of San Antonio into that zip code in an area that was clearly didn't have the resources and the access to all of the health care. They were driving across town, and we had learned a lot about one-car families, how many bus routes you had to go through to get from south side to this beautiful hospital that existed on the north side. And people did it. So through the pandemic, we learned a lot of those things. So we developed a partnership between Texas A&M College Station, the flagship where there is a medical school, Texas A&M San Antonio, and we signed those agreements before I left the fall before I left to come to back to California, which we'll talk about in a moment. But those are some of the pivotal steps of what it takes to be a leader in leading a foundation that is going to exist in perpetuity with changes that are really going to impact what it means to be a steward of place, what it means to lead in a community where we lift the residents and citizens who live there, along with becoming a national model for student academic success. So the SEAL, HSI, all of that was a part of that work.
Yeah, what a journey. Just incredible. So, what is it about your leadership style? How would you describe your leadership style or some of the attributes of how you lead that helped to facilitate that kind of change?
I understood my role, and my role was to provide solutions for my other cabinet colleagues, but specifically for the president, in enacting the vision that the president had and how to do that in a manner that aligns with their strategic vision. So you adapt to your leadership, to your question about what is it that the institution is trying to achieve and how you can help in that. So I think as leaders, our leadership morphs. We're always driven by our values. And that is really critically important when I said to you about purpose. So as a CFO, I understood and I still understand my values of always acting with integrity, never compromising the position of the university, and my responsibility to uphold the stewardship of the institution when you're the CFO. Those are some of what I call the basic hygiene of what an institution, from a leadership perspective, there are challenges every day. There are things you're going to confront, especially now through the pandemic and post pandemic. And what I have found to be a good leadership principle is when you're in the thick of leadership dilemmas, honesty is always the best policy. As simple as that sounds, when you're confronting challenges that have attorneys in play or have public safety in play, have student success, students are always at the forefront of what we do. Always, 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 no matter what your position is. Even as CFO, I mentioned those three attributes, but it's always about ensuring a safe and healthy place for students where they can be academically successful. So these leadership principles guide you when you are dealing with difficult challenges. When I was at A&M, one of the things that I used to think about, there was a gentleman there by the name of Senator Frank Madla. Senator Madla was the person who fought his entire career, 30 some odd years, to bring a university to South San Antonio and the ups and downs. And in the end, the legislation was started to sign. He made some trade-offs. He died unexpectedly in a fire. And I used to think when I was confronting the most difficult challenges at A&M, I would go outside and walk around the campus and think, is what I'm dealing with today more difficult than what Senator Madla was dealing with? And that would help me level set how to problem solve. You have to find inspiration
Mm.
where that comes from because these are very difficult, demanding roles. At the CEO level, when you're thinking about leadership, you're really thinking about what is the purpose of what you're trying to achieve. I was listening to a CEO talk about how they defined their purpose, one sentence. And so every time they confronted a challenge, they went back to the purpose. And it was easy when I was at A&M San Antonio to come up with a one sentence purpose. It was to help people change their lives because this university had not existed there before. And that helped guide me in from a leadership perspective on obstacles that come your way as you're trying to move things forward. So that leadership lens is much broader.
So thank you for bringing us to my next question, which is all about your return to California. So after an obviously very successful stint leading this new institution, you made the decision to come back to California to lead one of the California state system institutions, San Jose State University. I know one of the things I've had other presidents talk to me about is how they make the decision to move on. When do you know? How do you know it's time to move on? And in this case, how did you know it was time and why did you come back? Why did you want to come back to San Jose
Uh,
State?
oh, so I'll just speak for myself. For me, at the stage I am in my career, a lot of what brings me joy is also the people that I work with and have the opportunity to work with. So I was absolutely deliriously happy at Texas A&M San Antonio and felt that I would retire there. So I think in my reflection, it wasn't that, oh, gee, I'm looking for something else or it's time. There were no signals. I wasn't that intentional. I want to be clear because sometimes things happen and you have to be prepared for unexpected opportunities. And there are people that I admire and wish to work with sometime in my career. And interim chancellor Jolene Kester was one of those individuals. I had worked with her when I was in California. I had from afar. She was a president at another campus, so I had admired her leadership from afar. When I became a university president the first time, Jolene Kester was doing work with Askew, and her and my former president, Dr. Welty, had helped me and my first presidency in my first year really guide the strategic planning process, how to think this broadly, and really as consultants helped me steer through that first 2 years of being a first time university president. So it gave me a little insight into working with Dr. Kester and Dr. Welty, who I had worked with for almost 11 years, 10 years. When she became interim chancellor and stepped into a very complicated situation in the California State University's chancellor's office, I called her and she picked up the phone. And, we had a conversation about what are you going to be doing and as you go into this role and all the other things that have you having private conversations with people that you admire and are talking with. And one of the things I said to her is, if I could help you in any way, call me. That it was as simple as that. So the opportunity when it became available at San Jose State, it wasn't something that automatically popped up on my radar or something that I was looking at or even why I would come back. But the conversations with the recruiters and other people that I admire, who I spoke with and who reached out to me and talked to me about the role, who had face-to-face visits with me about the role, intrigued me enough to think, I'm going to look under the hood and see what's going on there. And as I did, I really came to understand and recognize the significance of San Jose State University, what's happening, the challenges that they were facing at the time, which you can Google and look up, opportunity to be in the Silicon Valley. And I mean, who would have known all the things that are happen with the advent of the turn of circumstances that have occurred with AI and the like. So it was inspiring enough, most importantly, to work with Chancellor Kester, even if it was for a short period of time. That was really what drew me more than anything. It was working with Chancellor Kester. It wasn't just about the institution. Because when you're at this level uh, of positional opportunity, who you work with, what's happening on the board are all significant in how you think about making a decision. I think there's a lot written, Melissa, about years of service. tenure, short tenure, long tenure, what happened to presidents that have been in office for 20 years, which used to occur now to people being in office. I think it's 4.7 or
Mhm.
5.1. It's an odd number, something like that. Years I had surpassed both of those markers. So it wasn't, it, it was serendipitous, is the best way that I can describe it. So when I was in the search, just things just lined up that helped me to understand that perhaps I could lead here and make a difference. And it was hard. It's very hard to leave San Antonio in making those choices. So when I got the job, I was so impressed at the interview process with the selection committee, with the board, with then Chair Wenda Fong, of course, Chancellor Kester. It just things lined up that made sense for me to want to say yes to this position if it was afforded to me. And there were a lot of other things that just lined up, like I was heading towards, like when the interview happened, how the circumstances lined up for itself. And my boss at Texas A&M, I'd spoken with him about this opportunity as I became a finalist towards the end, and what his encouragement for me to look at this opportunity was also very helpful in thinking about looking at the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful description of how somebody thinks about transitioning. And I'm struck by your openness. I mean, you were obviously, even though you were doing a remarkable job where you were still open. And having that relationship obviously was a important connector. Let me
Okay,
switch.
so let me say
Look,
something about that
yeah.
openness because I think I've had lots of calls over my tenure as the university president about opportunities. I think the when the right things comes along, you are also in a mindset where you're susceptible to listening or
Well,
susceptible to hearing. So I was at a moment where I was susceptible to hearing. And that's also part of, I think, this process of discovery. I don't think I would have been open to anything at any other moment because of where I was and what I was doing. Was who was there and then being susceptible to listening is another way for people to frame is that next opportunity the best opportunity for you versus where you're at, especially like I said earlier, I was deliriously happy there. To think about that. And that's different for every person. After I was offered the position, Chancellor Kester assigned me a presidential mentor, and the presidential mentor she assigned me to was President Surya Kohli, who's president at Cal Poly Pomona. This is one of two people I would stop what I'm doing to go help them. Chancellor Kester was one, Soraya Coley was the other. So these things just lined up in the universe of things lining up from them. There's a lot of things I learned from Chancellor Sharp, who was my chancellor at A&M, that I think about in leadership lessons on how I do this role in a bigger, more complicated scale.
so I want to change topics and ask you about diversity and inclusion. So, as a Latina leader, as a longtime advocate for diversity, how do you, as president, work to advance equity and inclusion?
So I think this work is very challenging and it is a continuum. I came into learning more about race, ethnicity, diversity, all of the academic principles around it when I was a CFO at Fresno State and was asked to serve on presidential committee around these issues and to learn more about it. And so I spent time with Elma Clayton Pedersen, who was is an author in this space, so along with others. But to really understand cultural competency, to understand the definitions of what is diversity, what is inclusion, what is equity, what does it mean to be culturally competent, then how do you apply this work? And that's when I really came to understand how hard it is. As a CFO and as a practitioner, there are things that are fairly black and white, there's things that are gray, and then there's things that are just really hard to define and to understand. So that was my journey into learning more about the academic principles and guidance around it. And then I came to understand more intently climate and climate surveys and how people experience the university. And I began to understand more intently that where you sit in the organization also shapes your experiences and your interactions and engagements in the organization. So, from a pure organizational development and organizational dynamics experience, I was trying to understand diversity, equity, inclusion, competence, experiences, how all this connects to sense of purpose, sense of belonging on the campus. This was at the employee level because human development, human resources. And then I began to understand structural inequities and I began to understand barriers in policies and what those impacts are. So it took me a minute. I don't think I have just a straight answer for this, Melissa, because for me it was a level setting, it was a grounding, it was an understanding. So when I went as CEO at Texas A&M University San Antonio, I had had these experiences in the California State University experience that helped me to think about my role then as CEO in developing an inclusive excellence concept across the institution. And what did that look like, especially in a community where there was a lot of homogeneousness in race and ethnicity? We are not homogenous as people, but there was more like-mindedness around the Latina community. My husband and I bought a parcel of land in an area that was a low income area, and we built our house there. And I came to understand food insecurity. I came to understand people having only access to a public bus system was their only way to get anywhere. I came to understand the dilemmas of healthcare even before the pandemic. So all of these things opened my eyes to something that I maybe hadn't even personally experienced. So as we were developing what does an experience look like for a first year student, because we were building that freshman experience or first year experience, a lower division transfer students gave me a really deeper understanding and appreciation for the inequities and the disparities that existed that we needed to address at the point of entry and this sense of community and sense of belonging. So all of those experiences are what helped for me to think about equity mindedness. And that's the lens I landed on when I was at Texas A&M University San Antonio is how do we think about equity minded and the diversity within the diversity. And that's how we led that conversation around framing those experiences. I think all of us, Melissa, learned more during the George Floyd incidents and the pandemic. We thought we were further along in the pandemic than what we were. And then we began to understand the disparities of people who had access to the internet and people who didn't. People had access to healthcare and people who didn't trust all these systems. It was all up. So how do you deal with all of that in some form of inclusive excellence is way more, it's more holistic. The whole student and whole person experience were a big part of how I thought about it. And I landed on this notion of equity mindedness. And I relied on consultants and experts to help us think this through and leading and guiding and looking for ways to embed that in professional development, orientation, family engagement, student engagement, words we use, vocabulary we use, how we show up, how the buildings show up, how we show up to an individual and what their experiences are before they've ever said one word to a person. All of those things sort of laid into this experience. And that's how I think about it. It's not super concise, but it's evolved over time.
Yeah. Well, no, and that's a very, very helpful perspective. As you think back to all the things that were put in place, Texas, at your campus, are there a handful of practices, concrete practices, that you found to be especially critical for the success of your students?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to be said about persistence, retention. I created a president's leadership class that was gave me an opportunity and it was focused on leadership, not on honors program. It was leadership. So I had a president's leadership class and that For me personally, in terms of practices, I taught the freshman experience to the PLC, the President's Leadership class. While I was there, it was a 4-year commitment that we made to students, and they had obligations. And what that did for me personally in terms of practices is it gave me an opportunity to be engaged with this cohort, and it grew over time. So it was 25 the first year. So by the fourth year, we had 100 students, provided that they persisted and graduated. But it gave me a real sense of sampling
Mm,
of what was going on in their lives, what was going on in our systems. I spent an hour with them twice a week when I was teaching. I couldn't teach during legislative session because I couldn't do it. So I would co-teach and find other ways to engage with the President's Leadership class and look for opportunities to build that network influence and or affluence and connections for them. But in terms of practice, that opportunity to be with students in that sense of community and building out that curricular experience and the co-curricular experiential learning engagement gave me much more insight into inclusive excellence
mm.
and a number of vantage points. Anything that you do, Melissa, outside of using technology is at San Jose State, where I'm now, we have a lot of practices, and our persistence, retention, graduation rates at San Jose State continue to rise. We've gone from single digit to double digits, multiple. That's a whole nother talk about persistence, retention, and time to degree. But as you get bigger, it's harder to scale. So
Yep.
it's a perennial challenge. But from a human resources perspective, I think the intent, another practice is the intentionality and understanding in the orientation and continuous learning about our student body, about their experiences, about administrative barriers, about and explaining it and positioning it in a way that helps the whole community understand what we're trying to achieve to be student ready and to accelerate time to degree or at least persistence so that a student can graduate even if it takes them 7 to 8 years.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
them, that's
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That's very helpful. I know many of the practices are documented in the What Works database in the Excellencia program and website. So if people want more information, they can certainly also go to that website
yeah.
to look at the specific practices. Let me ask you about women in leadership. So you have been recognized as a leading voice for women in higher ed leadership. I'm curious what challenges, opportunities you see for women who aspire to be in CEO presidential roles in particular, and any advice you may have for somebody who's just starting out and they may see you and think, wow, I want to do what she does someday.
So I think one of the critical piece of advice I often give to women leaders, depending on where they are in their career, is it's really important for you to have a roadmap for your career. It's important to have a guide. I learned from my very first, when I was a vice chancellor, from my chancellor, the significance of goals. It seems obvious, but we have to be intentional and purposeful of goals. And one of the practices that he taught me that I still use is to find a time to be committed to your own self assessment and what you're looking for. And I found doing that on my birthday or that birthday week, birthday month was really significant because it changes over time depending on where you are in your stage of life. If you're a young parent, if you're caring for aging parents, if you're pursuing a doctorate, whatever it is that you're doing really influences the time you have. So to be really critical with what you want to achieve in a manageable set of time, I find to be very critical on a year-to-year basis. In the roadmap, you want to be saying to yourself, where do I want to be in 5 years? Because time goes by really quick. And if we aren't intentional in that planning, we will be hoping for things that may or may not ever materialize. And as I say to women and people when I teach at the Nakubo Fellows or the Ask You Presidential Academy, hope is not a strategy, and you have to know what you're trying to accomplish. So as simple as that sounds, that's one of the things is develop goals, be very clear about your assets, be very clear about your value, be very clear about what you're good at. Also, be very clear and talk to others about where you need further development, how you come to learn and understand other parts of the organization besides the part that you may be either in your chain or directly responsible for. Because to be successful, the higher up you go in the organization, you really have to understand strategic organizational engagement. And you can't understand strategic organizational engagement if you don't know the other sectors of the university. So those are some critical critical components of how you think about developing so that when you write your 1-year goals on your birthday or whatever time that is, a new year, that you actually have some mile markers to achieve them. And also find ways to take care of yourself. I think we've learned more than anything through the pandemic, through our rushed lives, through more things that are added on our plate. And this is true for men and women, but I think it's particularly more true for women that we cannot be at the bottom of our to do list. So, being intentional in our self care and whatever it takes to be happy or joyous is important. And I tell people also to remember happiness is an inside job. We have to take care of that happiness.
Yeah, well, and that's a great segue. I wanted to ask you about your own resilience and if you have some particular practices or activities that you do to help take care of yourself. So are there a few things that you make sure that you do every week or every day?
Sure. So when I first became a CEO, president and CEO, one of the pieces of advice I received from someone who is the CEO was remember, they said, Cynthia, it's really important for you to remember to stay healthy. And I thought, that's interesting. I didn't know what to make of it until I was in the role of being a CEO. So I just thought, well, I'm healthy, I'm fit, I eat well, I take care of myself. When you're in the C-suite as a vice president, vice chancellor, or president, the pace is really fast. Things come at you faster than you can imagine. And in this age of AI and the convergence of technology, we are constantly learning, unlearning, and relearning. And so, this idea of staying healthy means a lot of different things. For me, how I stay physically and emotionally healthy is exercise. This is something that I actually enjoy doing. So I exercise every day or 5 days a week at a minimum, sometimes six. I try to take a day off from exercise, but I exercise. That's really important to me. And it helps me moderate my stress, helps me go to a calm place for thinking. It helps me shut out anything else that might intervene. I prefer to cycle outside if I can, because that gives me the most freedom to think while I'm moving and experiencing the community around me. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes I'm, on a stationary piece of equipment, but still I'm exercising. That's good. Set priorities for things that I want to accomplish in a week or a month, whatever that looks like. And I give myself 10 minutes or so to plan and prep for what's the next day. I know how to ask for help on the things that others can help me with. And I've tried to create dividing lines about these are the things that only I can do. And then I try to stay pretty disciplined about eating healthy. That's hard in these jobs because you're out a lot. You're management by eating around. So I try to be committed to having a healthy diet and what works for me and what doesn't work for me, whatever that is, and identify it for people around you. Because when you become a CEO, and the president, people are looking for clues all the time. So there are things that you can just provide. If you can help me by making sure I have a salad every day, or you can help me by making sure that I personally keep my water stocked every day. So just tell me on a Tuesday, the refrigerator's low, if somebody's going to pick it up or if I'm going to pick it up, that at least I know. So it takes me having to think about all these other things that people are helping me think about, the things that keep me healthy, little things that might keep me healthy,
Yeah, that's
whatever that might be.
yeah, that's great. That is great advice. So thank you for that. So we're at the end of our time. I have one final question. It's a signature question. And this year we're interviewing only women. So it's very particular for women leaders. So as a woman leading in higher education today, what do you believe is your most important contribution to the future of the sector of higher education? How do you hope your leadership will inspire the next generation of women leaders?
So higher ed is going through this great period of change. There's been other periods of change, and we talk about change a lot. I think what I can do in higher ed that will leave a lasting impact is for San Jose State to be the model as the Silicon Valley's public university of what that new model is going to look like in teaching and learning. And we're already doing that in how we've been preparing our faculty, how faculty are preparing themselves with AI, the convergence of tools, robotics, these teaching AI teaching assistants, AI personal learning assistants, and the like. And San Jose State is well positioned to do this. So that's part of where I think my leadership will make a difference in how we do that. I think for women in leadership, the significance of leaning into technological immersion, digital fluency, digital leadership, and how we as women will and can lead that with the most agility and flexibility in how we manage ourselves, how we manage career paths, and how we bring others up is going to be part of this entirety of the embedding ourselves in the technological advancements that are occurring into the future.
Indeed, and the opportunities are virtually unlimited, aren't they? So, Dr. Matson,
So
oh, go
can I
ahead.
say just one last thing?
Of course.
One
Yeah.
of the things that I have been thinking about as a first generation practitioner of that I things that I've taken from my parents is the significance of the inheritance of courage. And one of my colleagues, Enrique Aleman, writes about the inheritance of courage. And I think in this day and age, to remember that curiosity in this period of change is intellectual courage. And these are areas where women can really lead and make a difference in being curious and being courageous in how we move going forward.
A powerful word to end on. So, Dr. Matson, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your wisdom, and I wish you all the best on your new journey there at a place that's obviously lucky to have you. So,
Thank you.